All right. So from this morning's discussion of for each map filter and from fetching data, and before we get into looking at a BlackJack review, what questions do you all have? Kenny?
I still don't understand how to get our URL for the weather. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Plug it into my code.
So if you're looking at Open Weather Map and you're signed in, if you look at the examples, right, so you get your API key, and if you click on API, they give you 3 sections of their API, well, more, right? Current weather data, and then forecast information. What I'm asking you to do is work with the current weather data. Right? If you want to work with these others, that's like adventure and epic mode. If you click on the API documentation, it gives you how to get the weather for one location by city name. It says you can call by city name or any city name and country code, and the API responds with a list of results that match a searching word. So it gives you an example. Right? The API call will be api.openweathermap.org/data/2.5/weather $Q equals, and then here you put this name of the city you're looking for. So for example, London. So you're not going to hard code this. You're going to put in the name of the city the person typed into the search box. Right? So if we open this up, right, you're going to get this output. Right? If I copy this, I put this in here with my app ID. Let me grab that from Slack. Here's my key. Right. If I put in London, I get London's weather. If I put in Orlando, I get Orlando's weather. Tampa, I get Tampa's weather. Your task is to how are you going to make this URL dynamic based on the city that the person types in that input box. So your user interface is going to have an input box. Right? It's going to have an input box. You type a city like Tampa, and you can click on this other. Your code can access this URL and pull information out of it. If I typed in Orlando, it could show me the weather. You're going to access this URL and fetch this data. Does that answer your question?
No, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah. That's the homework, right? If I tell you what it is, then I'm telling you how to do the homework. So
do I have to put my key?
Yes, you put your key here, not my key. Right. So the name of the city goes here, and your key goes here. Right. That's how to use this particular example. This is by city. Down here is my zip code, and you'll notice the URL is slightly different. Right. It's not city equals or name equals. It's zip equals. So zip equals and the zip code someone types in. So the last thing the homework wants you to do is be able to accept a city name or a zip code. You can do it with 2 different input buttons if you want. This student came up with a way of doing it in one. City name or zip, right? 90210, Beverly Hills. Right? If you want to have one input and a box for a city name and another input and a button for zip, Awesome. Just know you use a different URL based on the way they documented their API to ask for weather by zip code. So
Out of curiosity, how do they handle when something can be found?
let's see what happens here if we put in a city name like XYZ. You get back something that looks like this. So maybe you want your code to be able to handle, if you get back something that looks like this, COD, with city not found, do something else.
How does it handle when you have two cities that are named the same thing?
Aha.
St. Louis.
So let's see, like, what's a good example? Portland. Portland's a good example, right? It's going to pick one of them, right? It's unclear necessarily which Portland it's picked. So if someone types in Portland, comma, OR, let's see, Portland, comma, OR, lowercase. Let's see. Does it give any hints? Comma, country code, but not a, so you can do London, UK, matching a search word. So it looks like it just gives you back one. What if we typed in Portland, Oregon? Nope. Yeah, it looks like it just gives you back the very first entry. I'm not sure which one it is. We'd have to look up these latitude and longitudes to see if it's giving us Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine. Let's,
Yeah, what's the install, the update that you said npm update?
npm space update instead of npm install. Let's see if that helps.
And then npm?
No, just npm.
Yeah. It didn't update this.
Yeah, with negative.
Oh, was it? It's a negative. I took it out. Negative. So. Yep, giving me Portland. Right. So pretty much every API you go to use is going to have some kind of documentation like this. If you're lucky, sometimes they'll have a little like click here for an example button, or they'll give you example links. Here you're going to be using by city name and zip code for Explorer mode. Adventure mode you'll do coordinates. Right, if you're going to use the geolocation API. Here you give them a latitude and longitude, and they'll give you back the weather for that position for adventure mode. And this URL will be the URL you'll give to fetch. And then the data that comes back will be this data. So just like we had in our example today, fetching data. In our example today, we fetched the URL. The URL we're going to fetch is one that looks a lot like this. We're going to have a fetch that looks like this. But it's not going to be hard-coded because you don't want this just to be Portland every time. You want this to be the name of the city the person typed in. So that part's up to you. How are you going to make that dynamic? And then what are you going to do once the data comes back? That part's also up to you. So instead of this part, well, not including the then people in space, right? This part will be pretty much the same, except the URL will be different and dynamic. And then the code that you do will be different because we're not dealing with people in space, we're dealing with weather. And maybe you're going to put it in a UL or an LI. Maybe it'll be something different. that part's also up to you. But this part here will be the same. Fetching and response JSON will be the same, except your URL will be dynamic instead of constant. Up to you to figure out how to make that URL dynamic. And then up to you to figure out what do you do with that data that comes back, right? Whether you're going to do something with that weather data that comes back. What are you going to do with this information? This is the data that will come back from your fetch. Figure out how to get the data out of this that you want and get it on the screen somehow. Other questions about the homework or fetch? Totally lost, 100%, 1000% confused. The best way is just to get in there and start working with it. A good way is go into this assignment, go into this example. Oh shoot, and I've already changed it because I was experimenting. Go into this data, go into this example, and see if you can kind of figure out how each of these bits work. Right. Put a console log in here and see what people in space is. Right. Put a console log in here and see what person is. If you really want to walk through how the code works, I'll show you in here. A couple of people this. One of the other tabs that's very helpful is the Sources tab. So in the Sources tab, it will show you all of your code. For instance, here's my CSS. Here's my main. I can go to this tab, and if I click on one of these line numbers, like line 17, when my program reloads, it will stop right there. So my code is paused right here in my debugger. The browser has literally stopped here and waiting for me to tell it to go step by step by step through my code. Kind of like that little inspector app we had before. You can see that it stopped here and it says I'm paused in the debugger. Over here are icons that will let me step over parts of the code, telling the browser to execute my JavaScript one line at a time. So if I want to stop the code here, like when this fetch happens, I can click on the resume, and then my code will stop once this fetch is done, and you can hover over variables and see what's inside of them, just like if you were console logging them. So I put a breakpoint here by clicking on this line number, and as soon as JavaScript gets to execute this line, it stops and pauses. Notice that the only thing that's in the browser right now is my name, because it's already executed this code, but it's paused right here. And I can hover over people in space and see, hey, look, it's got 3 people in it. Now, if I want to stop up here, I can put a breakpoint here and take this one off. Now, the browser, once I continue to stop here, I can step over each line individually and see what it does. If I step over this line, you'll see now that the browser even kind of gives you a hint of what that line did. Right? It made a new UL. If I step over this line, you'll see it made a new LI. And if I step over this line, it made the text content of that LI Sergey. And finally, when I step over this line, it put it into the browser. So this gives you a way to step over each line of your code and inspect what those lines are doing and see what those variables are. If I click the Run button again, hey look, it stopped in here again a second time because it's doing it for each element. Now if I look at what person is, it's no longer Sergey, right? It's Alexander Gerst. And if I step over each of these lines, Alexander Gerst shows up. And I run it again, I'm in here for the third time, for the third person. The person is this person, Serena. I step, 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 step. Run it again. Now I have control of the browser back. No more JavaScript is running. So this debugger under the sources view will help you if you want to step through the code and kind of see how it works. Right? When the code is nicely formatted like this, like it will be for the things that we do, it's super nice. Try and do this on a published website like Google or LinkedIn or something. All their JavaScript is jumbled up, so the debugger is almost impossible to use to see how they've done something. For the code that we've done in class, it's another good way to kind of step in and inspect what's here. So maybe play around with this code and see how that works. That's another good way to get used to it. All right. Once you change this URL to the weather one, right, and change this to say weather, and just put a console log in there, could you see what the weather object is? Then could you figure out how to get information out of it? Can you write down the steps as to how you would get the weather information out of here? Remember when I started the astronaut one, what did I do? I said something like people equals. Well, what if you started your program and you just copied this example out and had this as your weather? What if you started with a very static version of it and then used fetch later? If you go back and watch the video from this morning, that's what I did with this one. Right? I didn't start with fetch. I started with a static mock-up of my page, right? I put people, person, person, person. And then I pasted in a copy of the who's in space data. And I made that work by iterating, or in this case, pulling the weather out. Right? I'm always looking for the way to quote-unquote cheat. If the hard thing to understand is the fetch, I can just start with one example of the data. What would that look like? Oh, ABAP, you take so long. Oops, nope. Well, let's see what that would look like. What would this look like? Well, what if I just started with a copy of what that weather looks like? I'll just grabbed. Oops. Well, if I just grabbed one of these weather results, I just grab one of my code. Could I console log the weather and see this in my results? God, it's still installing. console log out. Console log out the weather. Hey, look, there's the weather. Okay. I'm not getting it from the API yet, but if this is what the object's going to look like, how can I get this temperature out? Here's my object. How do I get down to here to temperature? Object. So these are all the keys. Yes. What'd you just say? Say it louder, Michelle. Yes. Weather, which is the name of my variable, .main. So if I console log that instead, what do I get? Just the main part of it. Same person. What do I add on to the end of this to get the temperature? In this case, right, it's the same thing. It's just temp, just like you had .main, right? Because it's still just the key. Lo and behold, there's the temperature for my weather. Yeah, you were thinking it was an array. Yeah, but it's still an object, right? It's an object inside of an object. So if I console log weather.main.temp, if I log weather, which is my object, .main.temp, I get this. Right? In my example, I called my variable that has this whole object in it called weather. That's this whole object. That's what I called it in my program. .main.temp. I can finish my whole program with just as hard-coded weather. And when I'm done, I can rip this out and replace it with fetch. Right? Because I'll get the same information back. So I can build my whole program with just this sample data and not have to worry about the API part first. Because if I come in here and say, right, it's 284 degrees Kelvin. If I come in here and instead of saying Portland, let's say Miami. Here's the Miami weather. If I copy this and replace it, instead of getting 284, instead of 284, let's do it again. Instead of 284, I get 302. So I can. That's the part. That's the part that's next. That's the like. How do I write the parts to do that, right? So if you look at the example from today, right? I put the names inside of a UL and I built up LIs. So you can look at the example we did today where I put a UL in my HTML. I put a UL in here. And what I want to do is I want to build LIs dynamically. I want to take this weather, and rather than just console log it, what I want to do, here's where writing out the instructions help. This is, I will tell you right now as a class, if you try and speed to the JavaScript without stepping back and doing the cup stacking exercise for every one of these assignments, you will be missing the key learning experience. So many of you want to run right to the code and get the answer and figure out which thing slots in which thing. The people who excel in this program are the ones that go slow. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Is it? Yeah, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. The more time you take to think through and try and write things out, the more that aha moment of connecting it to the JavaScript will happen. So if this is how I get the main temp weather, what do I want to do? Right, I want to find the spot in the user interface where I want to put the weather, the temperature. Create a new element to put the temperature. Set that element's text to whatever is inside weather.main.temp. That's where we figured out where the temperature is in this data, right? Make that element appear on the screen. Writing this stuff out in as much detail as you possibly can will help you. If you start with this process and you're like, I'm not sure if this is enough detail, then you come find me. And I will tell you if it's enough detail, or I will help you get to the next level of detail. The more of this process you can do, if you just spent the rest of the day getting this out on paper, I'd be stoked. Right? The more of this you can do, right? How am I going to find the button? How am I going to know when they clicked on the button? What am I going to do when they click on the button? How am I going to tell a zip code apart from a name of a city? Writing out all of that algorithm is more important than writing the code. Students who excel at this will outpace, outdo, out-earn, out-job people who can slap JavaScript on the page. I guarantee you every day of the week, and twice on Sunday. It's just a fact, right? So I see a lot of students, like, they jump right in and they're trying to, like, do a loop and get a thing and do the thing and do the thing and do the thing, and they skip this part. If you have already learned this part of the muscle memory, awesome. But I can guarantee you every single one of you needs to do this more. Because almost every time you come to me, this is the buzzsaw you're actually running into. Right? And this isn't like the most challenging part of this assignment, right? The challenging parts are the other bits. This is part of it, right? And figuring out how to use fetch. But the more of this you can write out, the better. And in the beginning, you really got to go slow to write all this stuff out. Because that's where the maximal learning will happen. After a while, like, this will kind of become more second nature to you. And then you don't have to write out as much, right? You only have to write out 10 lines instead of 30 lines or 20 lines. But in the beginning, spend some more time doing this, right? It's like when I asked you to do the cup stacking. You all took about an hour to write out how to move 15 cups into a pyramid. Why do you think you can start coding this after 3 minutes? Right? More time spent here will help. The challenge is, right, trying to write this in a language that's close to what's in the computer's language. I will help you get there. I'm so happy when students come to me and say, like, hey, look, I've written out in Notepad or in VS Code all the steps I think this program needs to do. And then I will give you hints as to where you need to expand or contract or rewrite things. Then I know every time someone does that, when they sit down to translate that into code, they get the homework done like that. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Right? This is probably like, I don't know, a fifth of what you need to write out to get this going. Right? But notice, I'm not even worried yet about the API. I'm just going to copy some of the sample data out of their example. I'm just going to use that. I'm going to postpone the hard part. I'm going to postpone this weird part that Gavin's asking me to learn until as late as possible. If I can just hard code the weather, I'm going to, until I replace this part here with my fetch. And I showed you an example of that when we did the people in space. So if you're curious how that happens, go back and watch the part of the video from today where I did the people from space. Other questions? About this?
I forget how to make
update, let's say.
I don't know if you I pulled this up.
Yeah.
They should use that.
No, it's already there. Yep.
I just did, and there's an update I'm trying to do.
Maybe after you start.
So speaking of the going slow, I'm going to post this article in our Slack, and I recommend you all read it. I think it's good. Like I saw a lot of confused faces this morning. I think this is a good thing to review. So if today's stuff felt weird or complex, or like what you were saying to me this morning, I thought Mondays were supposed to be easy. That's a good article to read. So take some time. Let's talk about the BlackJack homework. So I think we had a start of BlackJack here in last week's day 3. Yeah, here's BlackJack. So let's npm upgrade. Maybe it's npm upgrade that I needed. See if this helps me.
NPM upgrade, sometimes the same problem.
Yeah, try npm upgrade. Oh, okay.
Weird.
Mine did.
It started, well, it ran one when we did an update, and it didn't change anything. I'm gonna restart that. This is
Okay.
when I restarted it.
So let's go back to where we had our code. I think this is all the code that I gave you. With something like this. So we have 2 buttons, one for hit and one for stay. We have an unordered list for the player's hand, and we have an unordered list for the dealer's hand. The player has these 2 cards, and the dealer has no cards. And if we update the display, right, we get different 2 cards for every time we deal. Let's take some notes about what we need to do. Let's keep track of some to-dos. Be nice if we had we display the total value of the player's hand. Be nice if there was a way to have the player bust if they go over 21. Right. While the player is hitting, is there anything else other than showing their cards? No, it's still freezing on me. I want to see if that does it when I'm not streaming. Okay. So as I'm hitting cards, is there any other behavior that we need? I think we just need to find out when the player has gone over 21, because they just automatically lose at that point. So maybe that's enough for now, these 2 steps. Right? That should handle all of hit. Does anybody else see a thing that for the to-dos for while the player is hitting cards needs to happen? Nobody's going to argue with me. We're going to display the value of the hand and have the player bust if they go over 21. All right, let's work on that. So while the player is hitting cards, these are the two things we need to do. It'd be nice to know that that's a 12, and that's an 18, and that's an over. Let's work on this first one. Display the total value of the hand, because we need this to tell if the player has gone over 21. And I can't figure out if the player's value if it goes over 21. So while we're dealing cards to the player, I would love to be able to figure out the total value of their hand. There's a couple ways we can do this. One way we can do this is we can make a new variable and set it to 0. When they start out, they have no cards, so the value of their hand is 0. If this is the card that I popped off the deck, this is this card, I can get the value of that card by asking for what? Card dot, if each one of these is a card, anybody, dot value. Card dot value is the value of the card. So right here I can say increase the value of the player's hand by the value of the card. The value of the player's hand is equal to the value of the player hand plus the card value. If every time I pop a card off of the deck and push it into the player's hand, I could just increment the value of the player's hand. There's one place in this code where the player gains a card. There's one place in the code I could increment the value of the player's hand. That kind of takes care of this one. Well, half of this one. We're gaining the total value. I just need a place to put it. Right? Up here, I'm incrementing the value of the hand. Let's go back to our HTML, and let's add a place to put it. Now let's make a p tag. Let's make a p tag, and initially it's empty. But we gave it a class of player hand total. Let's document query selector for the class player hand total. Let's make the text contents of that element the value of player's hand. It's locked up again. Every single time. Hey, 14. 4 plus 10. If I hit, 18. If I hit, 26. Too much. So every time I take a card off of the deck and I put it in my hand, I'm incrementing the value of this variable by the value of that card. And then I'm displaying. That's one way of doing this. The other way is, we just learned this morning how to iterate or enumerate over collections, arrays. Well, this player hand is an array. So let's do it a second way. So what if every time re-compute, let's call it re-add up the total value of the player's hand. So we would do this by make a variable value of player's hand 0. For each card in the hand, add the value of that card to value of player's hand. When done, value of player's hands is the total. Right? You want to go through each card in that array and add up the total, kind of like we did for scores today. Same idea. So rather than make this a variable up here globally, we'll put it here, and we'll use our friend for each. Player hand for each. This is going to take a function. Let's take some argument and a function. What is the player hand? What's player hand composed of? What kinds of things logically is it? They are, yeah, but if you were going to describe them in Vegas, my hand, I have blank things in my hand. Nope. So, yes, cards. In my hand, I'm holding a set of cards. So each one of these is a card. I'm just looking for a way to name this variable. If I go through for each player hand, I have a card. I'm going to take the value of player's hand and add the card value. Right? Kind of like how we were doing it here. But in this case, I'm going through every time and starting the value of player's hand at 0 and adding up the entire collection. So I'm not incrementing anything. I'm retotaling it every time. So this time it went through 9 and 6 and gave me 15. When I hit again, this code is setting this value back to 0, going through the entire array and totaling it. Both are fine. Both of these are fine. If you want to get fancy here, you could quote unquote simplify this code with a reduce. But until you really mastered map and filter, I suggest stay with for each. Right? So this happens every time this code comes through. And now we have the value of the player's hand. So now let's say we want to do the second part, right? We're done with this. We've achieved this part. Right, let's cross that off. Now let's have the player bust if the value of their hand goes over 21. So let's add a spot in the user interface. Maybe up here at the top, let's add a header and a paragraph here. Where we're going to put the current status of the game. Right? The game is on. We want to change this to player busted or dealer won, right, or player wins. All we know so far here is that if this player value of player hand is what? More than 21, displayed as a player busted. Our other rule says have the player bust if the value of their hand goes over 21. So we know here we just figured out what that value is and we put it in the user interface. So here we can just display that the player busted. So let's go find this element, this p tag. This is where we want this to say busted. Game status, the document, query selector. I want to find this value here. Well, this is a p inside of my header, my p tag inside of my header. So inside of my header, find a p tag. set the text content of this to player busted. The player goes over 21, they're busted. Let's see if this works. I think I need to reload my cracking. Let's spend some time this afternoon figuring that out. Why didn't I not get, where's my cards? It says I have cards 3, 10, but I have no cards this way. Did I take something out? Am I getting an error? Aha! A stop sign. Value of player hand. Oh, player's hand. Value of player's hand. See, I keep having to look for that error. There we go. Right, here's a 12. Here's an 18. Busted. Right. Aha. But I can keep hitting. As we go through and notice things, I can just keep adding to my to-do. So at some point, I just have to say, after the player busts, don't allow them to play anymore. Right? After I busted, I shouldn't be able to hit or stay. Right? It's not my turn anymore. So we add up the value of the hand. If that's over 21, we find wherever we want on screen to say we're over 21, we've busted. And there we go. That part's done. So let's add some more to-dos. When the player stays, what do we need to do? Have the dealer keep taking cards as long as the total value of their hand is 17 or less. Then see who won. How do we do that? So we can compare the player's hand total to the dealer's. Right? So if the dealer's over 21, we win. Right? Because otherwise we would have already busted. We can't be over 21 because if we were, right, we wouldn't be playing anymore. So if the dealer goes over 21, we win. Otherwise, compare my hand total to his hand total and see which one is a winner. So let's add some code for this. When the player stays is in our code. This is the same as when they click on the stay button. Let's go find the stay button. When they click, let's call the deal cards to dealer method. We don't have that yet. In the main, just like I want to wait around for the hit, I want to wait around for the stay. We call this deal cards to dealer. And just to know that it's working, I like to know that it's working, so let's just console log, hey, it's the dealer's turn. Yep, it's the dealer's turn. So now that I have a place for this code, let me move my notes up there. This is what we wanted to do. So as long as the total value of their hand is less than 17 or less, we're going to keep going. So we never dealt any cards. We never dealt any cards to the dealer, right, in our beginning. So we're going to need to do that. And eventually one of these should be face down, right? It's kind of the rules. You get a chance to peek at one of their cards and not the other one. So we kind of discovered we can't quite do this yet until we deal some cards to the dealer. Let's backtrack for a second. And let's deal 2 cards to the dealer. So here, let's also deal 2 cards to the dealer. So 2 times, let's deal 1 card to the dealer. Let's go define that function. So how do we get a card from the deck? Pop. We go look at here. We pop 1 card from the deck and we push it into the player's hand. Dealer's going to work the same way. Push the card in. And kind of the same way, we're going to add a card to the user interface. So much of this code will be the same thing. But it's not the player hand list, it's the dealer hand list. And the dealer hand list is this UL. It says the class and dealer hand. So the same thing, we find the dealer's hand in the user interface. We make a new LI. We put in the text content, or maybe you're using images, and then we append that item. Okay. Here's the dealer. So now the dealer has 2 cards. Maybe we also want to display the total of the dealer's hand just like we do for the player. So as we were dealing cards to the player, we were also totaling up the player's hand and showing it. Let's do the same thing for the dealer. So this will be very similar. We'll let the dealer hand total be 0. We'll go through the dealer's hand for each, 1 card at a time, and have the dealer hand total be the dealer hand total plus the card value. This works the same way for the dealer hand as it does for the player hand. Let's go find a place to put that in here. Well, if we did this for the player hand, let's do this for the dealer hand. Let's make a p tag for the dealer hand total. What should we call it? Here. We call this value of dealer hand. Let's use similar variable names. Let's go find the dealer hand total. What is it? Dealer hand total. Let's set its text content to be the value of the dealer hand. So now hopefully in the beginning, now we have both of these displayed. We've got the player's total and the dealer. You can stop me at any time and ask questions. This is your time. So if you've got questions, otherwise I'm just going to assume you're following everything.
I'm following this.
Cool.
I can't keep up with all the names from watching.
Yeah. Don't, if you can't type along, right, then go back and watch later, right, because we're already kind of over review it too. So here's our dealing one card to a dealer. Now let's deal with a case where we are staying and we're dealing multiple cards to the dealer. So we have to keep taking cards as long as the total value of their hand is 17 or less. So this means I'm going to keep asking the dealer the value of their hand over and over and over again. And when we find them when we're doing code over and over and over again, I don't want to have to keep putting this code everywhere where I want to know the total value of the dealer hand. These are like the 3 lines that total up the value of the dealer hand. And if I'm going to say keep doing something as long as this thing is 17 or less, it means I'm going to be asking for it over and over again. I don't have to keep recoding this in multiple places. So what I can do is I can just make a function called the value of dealer hand. That's because get the value of the dealer hand. Let's call it that. And let's have this function do this work. Let's have it start the value of the dealer hand at 0, go through each card in the hand and total it. Now this function, I want it to return the value of the dealer hand. This means that any time I want to know the value of the dealer hand, I can call this function. It will do this work and then give me back this value. Which means I don't need this anymore. And here I can just say, get the value of the dealer hand. Every time I call this function, it's going to total up the dealer's hand and give it to me. In which case I can just take it and put it in the dealer's p tag, where I display it. That means here I can use it while getting the value of the dealer hand is what? 17 or less. What do I want to do? Deal 1 card to the dealer. While, if you ask what the dealer's hand value is, if that's less than or equal to 17, just keep dealing 1 card to them. So let's see if I stay. Yeah, it went until 18. He's got 18, nothing happens. He's got 17, let's give him a low value. Here's a 4. Boom, of course 21, right? But notice he took 2 more cards. Because as long as we ask for the value of the dealer hand, if that's less than or equal to 17, we're going to deal 1 card to the dealer. Let's see if they're over 21. If we get the value of the dealer hand, if that's over 21, then what, right? The player wins. So we had some code up here, right up here, that said the player busted. Oops. Let's instead say the player wins. Oops, I think I need to reload. It's finally stuck. The player wins. Of course, I can still play, right? I probably want every time we update this, just have all of the buttons disabled, but we'll come back to that. Well, if I didn't go over 21, I want to compare my hand total to the dealer's hand total. Well, right now, the only place in the code where we do that, we get the value of the player's hand, is up here. So let's do the same thing. Let's make a function up here called get the value of the player hand. Let's do this up here and have it return the value of the player hand. Now I have one function in my code that gives me the value of the player's hand. And instead of this, I can say get the value of the player's hand. Then get rid of this. And I can say get the value of the player's hand here. So does this still work? Yep. Now, here, if get the value of the player's hand is more than get the value of the dealer's hand, the player wins, right? Otherwise, who wins? The dealer wins. Let's see. Except we need to have the dealer. Oh, okay. So we have this condition, but then we continued on. Right. So this if happened, and then these if happened. So we've got to do one of two things. Either you need to stop processing here, because we determined that the player wins, or we need to put these things in an else. Let's put these things in an else first and see what happens. Let's move these lines up here. So if the value of the dealer's hand is more than 21, we're going to do this. Otherwise, we're going to do all of this. So I'm going to say 21, the dealer wins. Ooh, I got 21. Player wins. I've got 12. Let's hit. Let's hit. I busted. 15. I'm going to stay and see what happens. The dealer wins. Okay. Now I would try all these and see if all of the conditions work. Right? We also said after play or bust, don't allow any more play. But really what this is after somebody wins, don't allow more play. So you can already see that in our code, we have a couple places where we get the game status and we change it, and we get the game status and we change it. Right, we do it up here, we do it down there. So let's make a new function called declare winner or loser. And what it's going to take is some kind of message, right? Like player busted or dealer wins. So what's the message we want to show? And let's move this up here. So every time we want to do this, instead of repeating that code, we can say declare winner or loser, player busted. Then down here, we do the same thing. We can declare winner or loser, player wins. Same thing here, let's copy and paste that. And the same thing here, except the dealer wins. And hopefully, yep, let's stay on a 6. Oh, dealer wins. Oh, dealer wins. Now we have a place where we could disable these buttons. Because inside of declare winner or loser, we could find the hit button. Right? I disabled that button. Or I could hide it. I could add a class to it and hide it. I can do the same thing with the stay button. Stay on 14. All right, these buttons are disabled. And I would go in and style the enabled buttons separately from the disabled buttons. Let's look at one of these should be face down. Let's work on that. See if we can do that with CSS. So we have the dealer has here. Let's pull this out. Let's not put this inside of an li anymore. Let's just put these inside of p tags. Here's why. Let's see if we can style this first element such that we don't see it. So we want to style the first li inside of here differently. We could say, yeah, we could say the dealer hand, let's see, let's take the dealer hand, li, nth child, 1, display none, right? It's still there. If someone were to be sneaky and come into our app, right, it's still there. The 9 of clubs is still there, but its style is display none, right? Because it's the first li inside of dealer hand. And we could add another class. Let's say we had dealer hand, and it has the class shown. Let's make the display, what was it, initial. So if the dealer hand also has the shown class, we'll put the display back on. So that means in the JavaScript, once we start dealing cards to the dealer, let's go find the dealer hand. Go find the dealer hand, and to the dealer hand, to its class list, let's add the class shown. Now, if the dealer hand element also has shown, the nth child 1, the very first element, will have the display initial. What we should get is, as soon as we hit stay, that first element shows back up. Interesting that the dot doesn't come back. That's curious. Right? So this is one way you could hide that first card. If you were using images, right, you could do something similar. Right? If you were using images with CSS, you could swap out the background image of that card. If that's how you were displaying the cards, using background image instead of an image tag. This is just one way of doing that. Right? We could have shown one card and then shown the other cards later. The other way we could have done this is when we were dealing the cards to the dealer, we could have dealt one card and shown it, and dealt a second card and not shown it, and then as we were dealing the rest of the cards, add that card to the user interface. That could work too. It's kind of up to you how to make that work. We have this part done. So the rest of this is just styling now. I would come back and add some more styling. Maybe rather than have these buttons disable, maybe I would have them disappear, or I'd work on styling them differently. This is the basic flow of doing this. Now, some other things in here I could optimize and change around. And this is certainly not the only way to implement this. If I looked at all of your BlackJacks, right, they're not all going to look like this. Right? Multiple ways of solving this problem, depending on how you wrote out your instructions differently than mine. So I know I commented on a few of them. The fact that this logic is here, and this logic is here, maybe I would change this around some, and really have there only be one place in the code where this logic is done. Because we're kind of seeing who won here, and we're seeing who won here. One of the tenets of good programming is this idea of don't repeat yourself, or that there's one place in the code that captures one idea. So you see how I captured in one place in the code getting the value of the player hand? There's only one place in the code that deals with getting the value of the player hand. But right now, there's two places in the code that kind of deal with figuring out who won. One of them is here, and the other one is up here. So if I were to continue to work on this code, I would work on there being one place in the code where it figures out who won or lost. Right? Because 6 months from now, when I come back to this, I want to find one function that says, hey, if you call this code, I determine who wins or loses. So that would be the next thing I would probably work on if I was working on getting this code to as clean as I could make it. But this code works, right? So working code first, tidy code later, other than formatting.
Which week do we come back to BlackJack?
I don't think we come back to BlackJack again. We're going to come back to the weather one a couple times, but I don't think we come back to BlackJack unless we want to. I don't think we reuse this assignment in the future. Player wins. All right. The most important part of this was writing out the instructions. Right. Without writing out the instructions, it gets really hard to figure out where to put the code to do the thing you want it to do. That's really the key. The more we practice that, right, the easier these kinds of challenges become. This is why we start putting the importance on doing sort of these daily kata practices, right? It's not about necessarily like making you experience the pain of hard programming challenges. It's the practice that's writing out the instructions for things. Can I take a problem like stacking 15 cups and break the problem down? Can I take the problem of what does it mean to hit a card in a blackjack game, or the rules of how the dealer plays? And it's not about trying to deduce the rules from something else. It's given the rules I'm given, how do I break those down into steps, right? And make those steps small enough that eventually I can turn those into the JavaScript code. So I'd prefer, if people are stuck, to spend more time with breaking the problem down and writing out the long instructions than trying to figure out the JavaScript code without it. Because once you can do that, the transition to JavaScript code is pretty simple in comparison, right? Neither thing is easy. Don't get me wrong. Neither of them is easy, right? But the part about writing out the instructions, and when we say we teach you to think like a programmer, that's really the part of thinking like a programmer, right? Turning that into this, right? If the player goes over 21, turning that into this, right? It's mostly about teaching you syntax and the particulars of programming. The more time you spend with the breaking the problem down, the better. Which is why, if you haven't taken this to heart yet, right? And you find like breaking the code down and getting it figured out, like if you're sitting here thinking like, how in the heck am I going to get this weather thing done? This process. If you look at some of those code wars and say, how in the heck am I ever going to get one of those figured out? This process. If you haven't read this, read it. Absorb it. This will really help you. If you're having a challenge with breaking problems down, this is in Slack tagged, but you can just Google search for PDAC. Problem example, data, algorithm, and code, PDAC. Those are my two best hints for you for things like breaking down and working on this afternoon's assignment, or something like BlackJack. The more time you spend breaking the problem down, easier it gets to get you over the hump into JavaScript land. Because the individual JavaScript bits, really not that challenging once you got the problem broken down. It's easier for me to help you, point you in the right direction for the JavaScript bits if you've got a good breakdown of the problem. So think about that as you work on this afternoon's assignment. I'm always happy to look at your breakdown before you start with the code. I'm always happy to look at your HTML structure before you start writing the JavaScript. If you're not breaking the problem down and writing your HTML before you start writing the JavaScript, you can get it done, it's just going to be a little bit harder. That's the harder path. I don't know about you, I like the easy path. Which is why I suggested for this afternoon Write out your algorithm, English steps like we did for the cups. What are you going to do? You're going to wait for the person to hit the search button. Then you're going to go look for that input. You're going to figure out what city they typed in. What comes next? What comes next? What comes next? Make your HTML design. Maybe design it out with fake data. Make your HTML design of what would your page look like if you had already gotten the results and you were already displaying them. Pick your favorite city in the world and show what the weather is like for that city. Right? Add the CSS and make your page look nice. If you've added enough HTML to your page, at the time it is to change the name of the city from, Paris, France to Orlando, Florida, that part's going to be simple. Right? It's almost cheating, starting with the full HTML and CSS. Right? And it's just taking your algorithm, if you've written it out in enough detail, and turning that into JavaScript code using your HTML and your CSS to your advantage. Try this today on this assignment.
I thought it was better to do the CSS last. Gives you pointers on which way to go.
Yeah, I know you don't have to do all of the CSS, but enough that you kind of style the page. More than I've done in the demos here, but less than the entire thing. Now, if you want to do that, that's awesome. Right? What sometimes happens is people get lost in the CSS and they never come out.
Yeah.
They're just like fiddling with colors and styles and animated GIFs, and they never get out of CSS and get to JavaScript. So I say do enough that the page looks nice, and then go start on the JavaScript. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be fully out, but do some CSS. The reason why is if you do enough CSS, you'll know that you have enough HTML. And if you have enough HTML and CSS, you likely have enough selectors, so that when it's time to go do your JavaScript, you don't have to invent more selectors just for your JavaScript. Maybe one or two. Try that out. Right? I'm always happy to look at what you've done. This step, this step, this step. Right? Use me as a sounding board. Say, hey, Gavin, I've written out my algorithm for this assignment. Would you mind looking at it? And I will help you point out where you need to break it down more. Hey, I've got my HTML laid on the page. Would you come take a look at it? Absolutely. I've got my HTML and my CSS laid out. Would you come take a look at it? Absolutely. Could you give me some pointers on where to start with the JavaScript? Absolutely. But if you flow this way, working on this homework is going to be easier. Same thing with BlackJack, same thing for the rest of the homework this week and the weekend assignment. Pretty much always in this order. Get through most of this, and you can always kind of backtrack. Right? JavaScript is frustrating me. I'm going to come back and do more styling. Styling is frustrating me. I'm going to do more JavaScript. If you get into the JavaScript, you're not sure where to go. You probably miss something up here. You probably miss something in your algorithm. So go back to your algorithm and break it down more. Then come back to the JavaScript. I will commit this BlackJack stuff so you all can see it. Any questions on that? It's hard. It's one of those things where you're gonna like see somebody else do it and go, oh, I mostly follow that. And you're gonna try and do it on your own, and it's gonna be challenging. But work on the part of breaking the problem down. If you spend a predominance of time on anything, spend a predominance of time on that. If you feel like, I'm not sure where to go. I know it feels weird because a lot of students kind of reject it. A lot of students give pushback on that. Because it feels weird. Right? I'm not programming, but you are.